The moment the linen napkin slipped across the polished mahogany table, everything froze. A billionaire CEO, used to commanding boardrooms and billion-dollar deals, sat suspended mid-bite, his fork hovering over a perfectly seared steak. Across the dining room, subtle glances and whispers danced like shadows. But it wasn't the attention that stopped him. It was the message. 4 hurried words, scribbled in ink on a folded napkin, carried a weight heavier than any financial report. They spit in your food. For the young black waitress who left it, Naomi, this was a risk that could cost her everything. Her job, her safety, her future. But for the man who thought he had seen every form of deception and entitlement, it was a mirror. And what he was about to discover would unravel more than just a meal. Naomi Brooks moved through the dining room with practiced precision, her tray balanced expertly as she navigated between tables. At 25, she carried herself with quiet determination, a soft armor forged from years of knowing the world often judged her before she even spoke. The Cradle, a high-end Charleston restaurant tucked inside a restored historic mansion, was her daily stage and her daily battlefield. Velvet drapes framed windows that caught the evening light, and gold-rimmed glassware sparkled on every table. Candles flickered gently, casting a warm glow over diners in crisp suits and designer dresses, their laughter mingling with the soft clink of silverware. Naomi knew the rhythm of this place, who tipped well, who barely noticed her, and which tables were reserved for the entitled and impatient. Raised in a modest neighborhood, Naomi's childhood was filled with challenges her peers could hardly imagine. Her mother worked 2 jobs to keep the lights on, and her grandmother taught her that dignity mattered more than applause. College had been a dream, nearly derailed by medical bills and tuition costs, forcing her to leave Howard University's law school. Now, each day at the Cradle was a balancing act, serving customers with grace while navigating the invisible barriers placed before her because of her skin. She had grown accustomed to the subtle slights, being assigned the back tables, being overlooked for shifts with better pay, and the quiet assumptions whispered by management and colleagues alike. She learned to move without causing waves, to smile while swallowing frustration, to witness injustice silently and store it away. Tonight, however, felt different. There was an undercurrent in the air, a tension Naomi couldn't place. Perhaps it was the note she had received earlier, an anonymous tip warning her that someone unusual would be observing the restaurant. Or it was her own intuition, sharpened by years of noticing the most minor deviations in behavior. The dining room was full of familiar faces, all of them privileged, all of them expecting to be catered to. Servers moved like clockwork, fulfilling their routines while Naomi's eyes scanned the room, alert to any irregularities. It was in this environment of poised elegance and quiet cruelty that she had learned to survive. The kitchen hummed behind swinging doors, a chaotic symphony of sizzling pans, shouted instructions, and the occasional burst of laughter. Chef Rick, notorious for his arrogance, ran his station like a small kingdom, and the sous chefs mirrored his dismissive attitude toward Naomi and the other black staff. She had witnessed careless, even cruel behavior many times, food being mishandled for specific tables, orders delayed, tips withheld, subtle mockery disguised as humor. She had stored it all in her mind, a mental log of every slight, every breach of fairness. But tonight, she knew something would shift. She didn't yet understand how, only that the presence of one unknown observer, a man out of place among the regular patrons, would turn her accumulated caution into action. The billionaire CEO Malcolm Devo had chosen this night to visit the restaurant anonymously. Disguised in a plain hoodie and sneakers, he moved through the room with the measured confidence of a man who had spent decades reading people, analyzing systems, and uncovering truth. Unlike other high-profile visitors, he sought observation over attention, seeking to understand the hidden mechanisms that perpetuated injustice in places that promised elegance but delivered bias. He was invisible to the staff, yet present in every detail: the slow response to black patrons, the over-attentiveness to wealthy white customers, the hidden hierarchy enforced through subtle gestures. Naomi's heart tightened as she noticed him, sensing that this observer was different. There was no arrogance in his posture, no entitlement in his gaze. He was calm, precise, calculating, but not detached. Her instincts screamed that the quiet dignity she had cultivated would be put to the test tonight. Every movement she made, every tray she balanced, every smile she offered was now part of a larger stage, one that could either protect her integrity or expose her to risk. In that moment, she realized that courage was not a choice, but a necessity. The dining room of the Cradle was a stage set for a quiet war. Its usual rhythm of soft chatter, clinking silverware, and the occasional pop of a corked wine was a mere facade. Naomi, moving from table to table with a precision that bordered on mechanical, couldn't hide the tension coiled inside her. She was a master at anticipating the whims and biases of the staff, the preferences of patrons, and the invisible lines of power that divided them. But tonight, a man in a plain hoodie sat near the kitchen doors, his quiet observation casting a heavy, unrecognized presence that imposed a weight upon the room. Naomi had witnessed many forms of injustice before: meals delayed, tips withheld, and orders subtly altered to signal who mattered and who did not. But as she poured wine and adjusted silverware, she couldn't ignore the subtle patterns of injustice repeating themselves in real time. Chef Rick's careless disregard for the sous chefs, the unease of the waitstaff around him, and the deliberate slights aimed at the black patrons in the back. Her stomach knotted as she realized this wasn't random. It was systematic, a gross injustice that demanded her attention. Malcolm Devo, the CEO she hadn't yet recognized, observed quietly. His presence was not just a coincidence, but a deliberate act to understand the dynamics of his own establishment. He was studying every micro-interaction, every subtle shift in the staff's behavior. Though he appeared ordinary, he carried with him the weight of decades spent reading systems and people alike. He noticed the way tables with white, affluent customers were served first, how smiles brightened only for certain faces, how the subtle gestures of the kitchen staff revealed both contempt and obedience. Naomi's pulse quickened as she registered that someone was watching, someone who might understand what she had witnessed and endured daily. The presidential prime was being prepared, a 48-ounce bone-in Wagyu beef steak, dry-aged and meticulously plated. Naomi had served this dish countless times, always to men who expected showmanship and extravagance. But tonight, she noticed a deviation, a quiet act that made her heart leap with fear and anger. Chef Rick leaned over the sizzling steak with a deliberate motion that betrayed intent, and then, in a blink, spat on the meat before sending it out for service. The sous chef chuckled, a short, dismissive laugh, signaling that this was not an accident but a message, that some people didn't belong, and the system was designed to remind them of that every day. Naomi froze for a fraction of a second, her instincts screaming denial, but the subtle cues, the laughter, the casual arrogance, the dismissal, confirmed the truth. Her first impulse was to avert her eyes, to follow the routine and serve the contaminated meal as she always had, protecting herself from the consequences. But something inside her shifted. She had carried these injustices silently for years, documenting them mentally, preparing for a day when she might act. And now, with a man observing who didn't fit the usual mold, someone who could see, someone who might have the power to change the system, she recognized a rare window. Every second counted. She had to decide, obey the routine, preserve her job, remain invisible, or act, risk everything, and possibly expose the rot she had silently cataloged. She reached for a fresh linen napkin, her fingers trembling slightly as she unscrewed her pen. Words would have to carry the weight of her courage. The message had to be clear, precise, and undeniable. They spit in your food. This place is not safe. There could be no ambiguity, no hesitation. The restaurant moved in its usual flow around her, oblivious to the storm brewing in Naomi's mind. Patrons sipped wine, servers hustled between tables, the kitchen churned with controlled chaos, and yet every sound, every movement was amplified in Naomi's awareness. Her heartbeat synchronized with the rhythm of the room, her eyes darting to the observer who remained calm, silent, yet fully present. Malcolm's gaze, though discreet, seemed to lock on to her, acknowledging the quiet storm building inside her chest. The risks were immense. She had seen what happened to those who defied. Expectations, job loss, humiliation, whispered reprimands. She thought of her mother's sacrifices, the unfinished law degree, the countless hours spent enduring invisible cruelty. All of it weighed on her, but so did the clarity of what was right. If no one acted, the system would continue, feeding itself on silence and fear. This moment, fleeting yet monumental, demanded bravery. The potential consequences of her actions loomed large, threatening to undo everything she had worked for, but the need for justice was even more pressing. Naomi's mind raced as she calculated her next move. She visualized slipping the napkin to the man at the table, the timing, the subtlety, the perfect window when no one would notice. Each step, from retrieving the pen to folding the linen with steady hands, was rehearsed in her mind 1,000 times. The idea of writing the truth, of entrusting it to someone who could use it wisely, ignited a spark that overrode fear. She could no longer be a passive witness. Courage demanded action. As the seconds ticked by, Malcolm continued to observe. He didn't move, didn't signal, didn't interfere. He was testing, watching, and giving Naomi the space to make her choice. That quiet trust, unspoken yet palpable, reinforced her resolve. She exhaled slowly, her muscles tensing, ready to transform the years of injustice into one decisive, irrevocable act. The room, alive with its usual noise, felt suspended, a crucible in which courage would either emerge or be buried. And in that suspended moment, the world shifted. Naomi knew the act she was about to commit could alter lives, careers, and the invisible hierarchy that had long oppressed those like her. This hierarchy, built on racial and economic discrimination, was the very system she was about to challenge. One folded napkin, one brief note, and everything would change. The moment arrived with quiet inevitability. The presidential prime, glistening under the silver dome, waited on the polished mahogany table. Naomi's fingers brushed against the crisp napkin in her apron pocket, her heart pounding like a drumbeat against her ribs. Every nerve in her body screamed caution. Every instinct reminded her of the consequences. A lost job, whispered reprimands, the disapproval of managers and colleagues alike. But fear was no longer enough to stop her. The injustice she had witnessed, the deliberate humiliation of the kitchen staff and the spitting in the food, demanded a response. Tonight, she would no longer be a silent observer. Malcolm Devo, the billionaire CEO, remained an enigma at the end of the table. His plain hoodie and worn sneakers made him invisible to the staff, yet every glance he cast was precise, assessing, reading the subtle currents in the room. Naomi felt an unusual weight in his gaze, not one of judgment, but of quiet expectation. He was waiting, silently challenging her to do what was right and act with courage, despite the risk. She took a slow, measured breath and began the act she had rehearsed in her mind countless times. With steady hands, she retrieved her pen and the linen napkin. Her fingers shook slightly, betraying the fear and determination coiled inside her. Carefully, she wrote the words, each letter deliberate, each phrase carrying the gravity of years, spent enduring injustice. They spit in your food. This place is not safe. Ask to see the kitchen cameras. No signature, no flourish, just the truth, folded tightly into the napkin like a quiet weapon. She tucked it carefully into the corner of the plate, sliding it across the polished surface toward Malcolm without a word, without a glance. The room's ambient noise, the soft chatter, the clinking of silverware, the distant sizzle from the kitchen seemed to fade, leaving only the weight of her decision. As she stepped back, Naomi felt the full force of tension compress her chest. She had committed an act of defiance in a world that demanded compliance. For a fleeting moment, she imagined the consequences, Chef Rick noticing, the manager questioning, her job hanging in the balance. But then she caught Malcolm's eyes, calm, unwavering, and understanding, and she felt a small flicker of reassurance. He had seen, he would act, he understood. She had risked everything, her job, her reputation, her livelihood, to do what was right. Across the room, the kitchen continued its usual rhythm, oblivious to the unfolding drama. But Malcolm's focus was absolute. He unfolded the napkin with deliberate care, reading the stark words as if they were commands from the universe. Each phrase struck him with clarity. They spit in your food. Not just negligence, not just a minor offense, but intentional, systemic cruelty. This place is not safe. The words resonated beyond the confines of the dining room, echoing the hidden injustices Naomi had endured for years. The CEO rose from his seat with deliberate composure, his calm a sharp contrast to the storm brewing in his mind. Every movement was calculated, every action signaling authority without violence. He approached the manager's office, his steps measured, carrying the weight of the napkin like a lever poised to shift the balance of power. Naomi watched from a distance, her breath shallow, heart racing. The tension in the room was palpable. Every eye was fixed on the unfolding drama. This was the culmination of years of observation, of enduring subtle humiliations and invisible barriers. Her courage had sparked a chain reaction that could not be undone. Inside the office, Malcolm confronted the system. He requested access to the kitchen cameras, to the footage that would reveal the truth behind the polished facade of the cradle. The manager faltered, caught off guard by the sudden authority of a man no one realized was watching, evaluating, and commanding. Malcolm's presence alone shifted the dynamics, exposing the cracks in a system built on privilege and silent complicity. His actions were a testament to the power of one individual to challenge and change a system. Meanwhile, Naomi remained in the dining room, her chest rising and falling with the intensity of the moment. She had acted. She had risked everything to protect the integrity of her work and the dignity of others. There was no applause, no immediate recognition, only the quiet satisfaction of knowing she had done what was right. The napkin, a simple piece of cloth with a written truth, had become the catalyst for change. As the confrontation inside the office unfolded, the tension in the dining room remained palpable. Every glance, every gesture carried the weight of anticipation. Naomi's courage had illuminated the invisible structures of power and bias that had long dictated the rhythm of her days. And in that suspended moment, the world shifted, not through force, not through spectacle, but through the quiet, undeniable act of one person choosing to act against injustice. The climax of the evening was not a shout, a fight, or a collapse. It was a revelation. The truth, carefully penned on a simple napkin, had pierced the carefully maintained veneer of control. The system, long unchallenged, now faced exposure. Naomi had ignited the spark, and Malcolm Devo, the unseen observer, was prepared to turn that spark into a reckoning. In the stillness after her act, Naomi understood the magnitude of what she had done. She had not just acted, She had transformed fear into courage, silence into action, and observation into accountability. The room, alive with its usual elegance, now held the potential for real change, a change initiated by a single brave decision. Her transformation from a silent observer to a courageous actor was a testament to the power of individual bravery in the face of injustice. The moment the napkin left Naomi's hands, the course of the evening, and perhaps the lives intertwined with the cradle, shifted irreversibly. Malcolm Devo, the quiet observer, didn't react impulsively. He moved with measured purpose, carrying the weight of her truth like a weapon against injustice. He accessed the kitchen cameras, scrolled through the footage, and confirmed what Naomi had feared and what she had silently cataloged for years. Chef Rick had indeed spat on the food, deliberately mocking those whom the invisible system had marginalized. Other incidents revealed a pattern, a deliberate disregard for black customers and staff, masked behind an elegant dining room and polite smiles. The realization was both chilling and empowering. Naomi's act had not only exposed a single injustice, but revealed the systemic rot that had gone unchecked for years. Malcolm began the process of holding the staff accountable, quietly yet decisively. The chef, sous chef, and even the manager were confronted with irrefutable evidence, unable to hide behind their usual deflections. Consequences were swift: terminations, investigations, and immediate measures to overhaul the restaurant's culture. What had started as a quiet act of courage had blossomed into institutional accountability, demonstrating that even one brave decision could spark monumental change. Outside, the restaurant continued its rhythm, unaware of the storm that had quietly erupted within its walls. Naomi returned to her duties, but the weight on her shoulders had shifted. She had acted, and in doing so, she had reclaimed a sense of power that had long been denied to her. With each step she took and each table she approached, she was infused with a newfound confidence. Her presence was no longer invisible. She had transformed from observer to catalyst, from passive witness to active force of change. Her empowerment was palpable, a testament to the transformative power of courage. Malcolm's intervention was deliberate, yet understated. There were no grand gestures, no public shaming, just the firm application of authority and the enforcement of standards that should have been upheld from the beginning. Naomi observed him as he coordinated with legal teams, HR, and compliance officers, orchestrating a meticulous response to ensure accountability and prevent future injustice. It was a masterclass in leadership, quiet, precise, and unwavering. And at the center of it all was the truth, a simple message written on a napkin, folded and delivered with courage. The aftermath reshaped the restaurant. Walls were repainted, menus redesigned, and the staff received extensive training on bias and sensitivity. The culture shifted from one of silent oppression to active inclusion. Naomi was offered a pivotal role as Director of Ethics and Culture, a title that carried weight and responsibility. She now had the power to influence hiring, training, and customer interactions, to create a system that recognized dignity and equity rather than ignoring bias behind polished service. What had once been a battleground of subtle humiliations had become a space where integrity was central, where courage was recognized and rewarded. But beyond the structural changes, the impact on Naomi's life was profound. For the first time, she walked with unshakable confidence in her workplace. The lessons she had internalized about perseverance, resilience, and moral courage were validated in real time. She had witnessed firsthand that even in the most entrenched systems of power, one voice, one action could catalyze transformation. And in her quiet moments, she reflected on the broader implications. The everyday injustices faced by countless people, the silent endurance required, and the power of speaking up even when the cost is high. Malcolm recognized her courage not just with promotion, but with mentorship. He offered her guidance, resources, and support for completing her law degree. acknowledging that her fight against injustice extended beyond the walls of the restaurant. Together, they became a force for change, proving that ethical leadership and individual bravery could intersect to create meaningful transformation. Malcolm's mentorship was a beacon of hope, a demonstration that ethical leadership can nurture and empower those who choose to act. Naomi's story became a blueprint for others, a demonstration that systemic inequity could be challenged from within, and that the quiet acts of the courageous could ripple outward, affecting both people and institutions. As news of the internal reforms and leadership changes reached the broader community, the Cradle became a symbol of accountability. It was no longer just a restaurant known for opulence or exclusivity. It was a testament to what happens when courage meets responsibility. Patrons noticed the change in atmosphere, the genuine warmth in service, and the intentional effort to prioritize inclusion and fairness. The narrative of injustice had been rewritten, not through confrontation or spectacle, but through deliberate, quiet action and principled leadership. Naomi herself understood the real takeaway. Courage wasn't about confrontation. It wasn't about fame, recognition, or even personal gain. It was about recognizing injustice and choosing to act in alignment with truth, even when the cost was uncertain. Her napkin, folded tightly with her message, had become a symbol, not of one incident, but of the power inherent in principled action. It reminded her, and everyone who would hear this story, that change often begins with small, deliberate choices, and that one person's moral clarity can illuminate the path for many others. And as she looked back on that night, Naomi realized that justice wasn't a destination. It was an ongoing commitment. Every day she would confront subtle slights, inequities, and biases, armed with experience, authority, and courage. Every decision, every interaction, became an opportunity to reinforce dignity and fairness, to remind herself and others that moral courage could not be measured by visibility, but by impact. The ongoing commitment to justice was a call to action, a reminder that the fight against injustice is not a one-time event, but a continuous struggle. The story concluded not with spectacle, but with reflection. Naomi's bravery had sparked systemic change, Malcolm's leadership had enforced accountability, and the restaurant had been transformed from a bastion of exclusion into a space of integrity. And yet the most crucial lesson endured. Real power lies not in wealth, position, or authority, but in choosing to do what is right, even when no one else is watching. In the quiet aftermath, the question lingered for everyone who witnessed or heard the story. How many injustices have you silently endured, and what might happen if you chose to act? For Naomi, the answer was clear. Courage is contagious, and even one voice, when wielded with conviction, can change everything.